It was a quiet evening, and I was home alone, savoring the peace and solitude. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me in charge of the house. I had just finished dinner and settled on the couch to watch a movie. The neighborhood was eerily silent, as it usually was. My neighbor's house, which had been empty for 15 years, added to the stillness. The once vibrant home now stood as a hollow reminder of the past, its windows dark and its lawn overgrown. As midnight approached, I felt a growing sense of unease. The movie I was watching didn't help. It was a horror film filled with jump scares and eerie sounds. I was on edge, but I told myself it was just the movie playing tricks on my mind. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. I paused the movie and sat still, listening. Maybe I had imagined it, but then it came again, a firm knock, echoing through the silent house. I stood up and cautiously approached the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered through the peephole. To my surprise, no one was there. I opened the door slightly, just enough to look outside. The porch was empty, and the street was deserted. I stepped out, looking around. There was no sign of anyone. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, I went back inside and locked the door. Maybe it was some kids playing a prank, I thought, trying to reassure myself. I returned to the couch and resumed the movie, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept wandering back to the knock. It didn't make sense. Just as I was starting to relax again, I heard it. Another knock, this time louder and more insistent. Fear gripped me as I approached the door once more. This time I turned on the porch light before looking through the peephole. Again, no one was there. I opened the door and stepped outside, my eyes scanning the darkness. The night was still, with only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. Suddenly, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door of the empty house next door was slightly ajar. It had been locked tight for years, and no one had been inside since the previous owners had left. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could be there, and why now? I grabbed my phone and called my parents. They tried to calm me down, suggesting it might be a squatter or an animal. But deep down, I felt something more sinister was at play. I decided to call the police. When they arrived, I explained what had happened. 2 officers entered the empty house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I watched from my porch, my heart in my throat. After what felt like an eternity, they returned. "There's no one inside," one of the officers said, "but it looks like someone's been there recently. We'll keep an eye on the place." The police left, and I was left standing on my porch, staring at the house next door. The door was closed now, but the sense of unease remained. I went back inside, double-checked all the locks, and decided to sleep with the lights on. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next morning, I spoke to a few neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Days turned into weeks, and the incident became a distant memory. But every time I walked past that empty house, I couldn't help but feel a chill. The knock on my door remained a mystery, one that would haunt me for years to come. I would often lie awake at night, listening to every creak and whisper, half expecting to hear that firm knock again. Despite the passage of time, the eerie stillness of that night and the unanswered questions left a lingering sense of dread, a reminder that some mysteries are never truly solved. Late one Friday night, my friend Mark and I returned home from an exhausting day exploring the city. It was well past midnight when we pulled into the driveway, the moon casting eerie shadows across the garden. The house stood silent and dark, its windows reflecting the ghostly light. Mark left after dropping me off, leaving me alone to navigate the unnerving silence. As I approached the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I fumbled with my keys, my eyes darting around the garden. The wind rustled through the trees, creating unsettling shapes that danced in the corners of my vision. Each shadow seemed to reach out, grasping at the edges of my awareness. Finally inside, I locked the door behind me and exhaled a sigh of relief. The comforting hum of the refrigerator and the familiar creak of the wooden floors welcomed me. I headed straight to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, hoping to calm my nerves. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back of the house. My heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen, listening intently. It could have been the wind or perhaps an old house settling. I tried to reassure myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I turned on all the lights as I made my way through the house, each flick of the switch a small comfort. The shadows receded, but a nagging feeling of unease remained. I reached the living room and stared out the large window overlooking the garden. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a dark figure standing near the old oak tree. It was tall and motionless, blending almost seamlessly with the night. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling, and called Mark. The line rang endlessly before he finally picked up. "Hey, what's up?" he answered groggily. "Mark, there's someone in my garden," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Calm down, it's probably just your imagination," he replied, trying to soothe me. "Turn on the lights outside and take a look." Reluctantly, suggested. With a click, the garden was bathed in a harsh, artificial glow. The figure was gone. I scanned every corner, every shadow, but there was no sign of anyone. I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and lingering dread. "See? Nothing there," Mark said. "Get some sleep, you've had a long day." I nodded, still unconvinced, and hung up. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one before heading upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, the sensation of being watched returned, more intense than before. In my bedroom, I closed the curtains tightly and crawled into bed, leaving the bedside lamp on. Sleep was elusive, my mind replaying the events of the night. Just as I began to drift off, a soft tapping sound echoed through the room. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the window. Summoning all my courage, I crept to the window and peeked through a small gap in the curtains. My blood ran cold. The same dark figure stood directly outside, closer than before. Its features were obscured, but I could feel its eyes boring into me. The tapping continued, each tap like a countdown. I stumbled back, reaching for my phone to call Mark again. But before I could dial, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. The tapping stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I huddled in the corner of my room, clutching my phone like a lifeline, its screen the only source of light. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, listening to the deafening quiet. Finally, the power flickered back on, and the house hummed to life. Cautiously, I approached the window once more. The figure was gone. I checked the garden, but it was empty. Shaken, I spent the rest of the night wide awake. Every creak and groan of the house amplified in my ears. Morning light brought a fragile sense of safety, but as I stepped outside, I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. Etched into the dirt beneath my window were the words, "I'll be back." Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. It was a chilly Saturday evening, and the house felt especially empty. My father and sister had gone to attend our cousin's wedding in a nearby town, but I had opted to stay home. I wasn't keen on weddings, and our house, despite being old and creaky, always provided a sense of comfort and solitude. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the old wooden floors, I settled in with a book in the living room. The wind outside howled through the gaps in the window frames, making the house groan and creak even more than usual. I shivered slightly, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, and tried to lose myself in the story. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, its eerie echo resonating through the house. I glanced at the time, surprised at how quickly the evening had flown by. I decided to make a cup of tea to warm myself up. As I walked to the kitchen, the floorboards creaked under my feet, a familiar sound in this ancient house. The kitchen light flickered as I entered, casting fleeting shadows on the walls. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove, the faint hiss of gas adding to the ambient noise. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from upstairs. I froze, heart pounding. The house was old, sure, but that sound was too deliberate to be the usual settling noises. I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer, its beam piercing through the darkness as I made my way to the staircase. The steps creaked with each movement, and the air grew colder the higher I went. Reaching the top, I paused, listening for any further sounds. All was silent. I checked each room methodically, starting with my father's study. The door creaked open, revealing the cluttered space within. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents casting strange shadows in the flashlight's beam. Nothing seemed out of place. I moved on to my sister's room and then mine, both equally silent and undisturbed. Finally, I reached the attic door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, which was unusual. My father always kept it closed and locked. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed it open, revealing the dark, musty space beyond. The beam of my flashlight caught dust particles floating in the air, and the smell of old wood and forgotten memories filled my nostrils. As I stepped inside, a cold draft swept through the attic, making me shiver. I scanned the room with the flashlight, its beam bouncing off old trunks and discarded furniture. Suddenly, the light caught something that made my blood run cold. A figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. I gasped, dropping the flashlight. It hit the floor and rolled, casting erratic shadows around the room. I scrambled to pick it up, heart pounding in my chest. When I shone the light back on the corner, the figure was gone. A chill ran down my spine as I backed out of the attic, slamming the door shut behind me. I hurried back downstairs, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? The logical part of me insisted it was just a trick of the light, but my gut told me otherwise. I decided to call my father, hoping for some reassurance. As I reached for my phone, the lights flickered again, and then the power went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled with my phone, using its dim screen light to navigate. Just as I was about to dial, I heard the sound of footsteps downstairs, slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me. I locked myself in my room, my mind racing for an explanation. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside my door. I held my breath, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Minutes passed in agonizing silence, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The power flickered back on, and the house was once again bathed in the soft glow of electric light. I cautiously opened my door and found nothing but empty hallway. The sense of dread lingered, though. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, my father and sister returned. I recounted the night's events, but they dismissed it as a vivid nightmare or an overactive imagination. But I knew what I had experienced. The house, old and creaky, held secrets in its shadows, and someone had made their presence known to me.